All right, I want to say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for the year of Tafshin Pei 5785, the Tilsa Mishpacha, for dedicating all the Shirim and Drashos this year as a zchus for Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors, the Kelman Mishpacha, for dedicating all the Shirim this month in memory of Amit ben David Levi, Zichron Livracha, brother of Itai Levi, who was killed fighting in Gaza on the first night of Hanukkah. May his precious neshama have an aliyah, and his family a nechama. Our week of learning sponsors, Rabbi Aryeh and Chana Richter, in memory of Rabbi Richter's grandmother, who was just nifteres yesterday. Levaya is today. Sarah Bas Shimon, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah, and the family a nechama. You will see with that. Let us begin. So today's daf is Membeis 42. We are picking up a lot to do today. Some really, really beautiful Gemara ahead of us over the next, every day. The truth is. So we left off on Mem Aleph on Membeis 41b. 41b, and we left off at the two dots. Actually, we really left off at the end of the exchange. Remember again, in the end of yesterday's daf, there was a beautiful exchange between Rav Kana of Safra. Right, Rav Kana of Safra were learning Sanhedrin in the yeshiva of Rabbah. So Rami Bar Chama went ahead and was interacting with them. So Rami Bar Chama said, "What are you learning?" And again, the Gemara recorded a really beautiful and special exchange between these rabbanim. So the Gemara says as follows. So if you remember again, the end of the discussion was Amar lahu ihachi amrisu ba tuva amrisu. So I'm sorry, Rami Bar Chama was very impressed by what Rav Kana and Rav Safra were saying. So he said, if you said this, you've taught me so much about Sanhedrin. I just wanted to mention the last part, Amrilei mitivusa demar amrina bituva. So this is interesting. Rav Kana and Rav Safra said back to Rami Bar Chama, because you are so pleasant to deal with, we were able to share with you so much. Had you been a little bit more difficult, right? Had you been a little bit more sharper, we would not have been able to share with you as much. And if you take a look at Rashi says something so beautiful over here. Mitivusa demar amri beituva, machmas sha'ata tov va'anav, umodel amru baharbe. So this is beautiful. So Rav Kana of Safra we're saying to Rami Bar Chama, because you are so pleasant and you are so humble, we're able to share with you so much. Conversely, if you wanted to be a contrarian, right? If you wanted to be difficult, if you wanted to be combative, so this is such a beautiful and incredible idea. What Rav Kana and Rav Safra were saying was telling Bar Chama, because you're so pleasant, we feel comfortable sharing with you so much. Your pleasantness, your kindness brings out so much kedusha from us. Had you been a little bit more caustic and difficult and perhaps not as agreeable, it would have been more difficult to be able to share with you our Torah. So a really beautiful and profound idea that sometimes, when we are pleasant in our interactions with other people, it brings out greatness inside of them as well. When people react positively to kindness versus and we all know this, right? When you have an interaction with someone who's like combative and contrarian, which some people are just like, you know what? I just want to whatever level of interaction I have to have, I'll have, and then I want to get out. I have absolutely zero interest in interacting. When someone is kind and someone is compassionate and someone is sweet and someone is just emotionally giving in their interactions, there's a desire to want to engage, and that brings out even more from the person who has so much to give. Just a very beautiful Gemara. Echad Omer. So the Gemara goes weiter. Ad Kama. So we'll say, remember again, the Mishnah highlighted the idea that halacha l'maisa, witnesses could be off in their timing up to 2 days. So the shaila is, how far into the month can we go ahead and allow for people to be off in their timing? So ad kama. So says the Gemara, Until you get to the middle of the month, or what we'll call the majority of the month. In other words, you can't go up to the majority of the month. We could assume that people could be off a little bit in their timing, but once you get past the majority of the month, we can't really allow for any type of discrepancies in timing. So Rashi says over here, Ad kama yikansu b'soch hakodesh de'im yesh b'neim yom echad ne'ma d'tov b'ibar hakodesh. So in other words, we'll allow. Remember again, we said, for example, if one aid says it happened on the 2nd of the month, one aid says it happened on the 3rd of the month, so we could allow for that, right? Why? Because we could assume maybe one of them heard about the fact that last month was a 30-day month, whereas the other one thinks that it was a 29-day month. But the shaila is, up until what point in time could we allow for that type of discrepancy? So Rav Asi said to Rabbi Yochanan, up until the majority of the month. So Amar Rabba, Afana Nami Tanina. So we learned this in Mishnah as well. If one witness says the murder happened on the 2nd of the month, one witness says it happened on the 5th of the month, their eidos is batal. So why don't I say like this? There is a way to explain a discrepancy between the 3rd and the 5th, right? How can you explain it? Right? Witness number 1 thinks the last 2 months were 29 days each. Witness number 2 thinks that the last 2 months were 30 days each. That explains that there's a discrepancy between 2 days. To which the Gemara says, "Elam mishum deberuba yada." So because what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha lemaisa, once you get to the what we'll call the rove, into the majority of the month, we assume everyone knows the exact date. So the Gemara says, it could very well be that even once you get to the middle of the month, not everyone knows if the previous month was a mali or a chaser. Right, that's possible. But what does everyone know? They know about the shofar blowing. Meaning what? That halacha l'maisa, the shofar is blown, right? Rashi points out over here that the shofar is blown at the beginning of every month. So everyone knows about the shofar blowing, and therefore again, halacha l'maisa, you'd be hard pressed to say that somebody didn't know what the previous month was or wasn't. So it's possible maybe 1 month you missed the shofar blowing, declaring the new month. But to say that for 2 months you missed the shofar blowing, so ultimately again that would be highly improbable. So I'll say, so now interestingly enough, because we're talking about the new month, so now we go ahead and transition a little bit over here to a really great discussion. Up until what point in time can one recite Kiddush HaChodesh? Berchas Halavana, Kiddush HaChodesh. Up until what point into the month can you bench the new moon? So the Gemara says, Tismali Pigi Masa, until the deficiency of the moon is completed. So the Gemara says, V'kama, okay, how much is that? So what we're asking is, of what point up to what point in the new month is one permitted to say Kiddush HaChodesh? So the Gemara gives us an answer. Until the deficiency of the moon is filled in. The Gemara says, Shkoyach. What is that? What is that? Give me a date. Give me a time in the month that I can say Kiddush Levana. The Kama, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ad Shiva. So Rabbi Yehuda says, up until the 7th of the month. Up until the 7th of the month, you can go ahead and say Kiddush Levana. Okay, so the Gemara says, the Nardoim say up until the 16th of the month. So what's an interesting machlokes over here? Rabbi Yehuda, you can say Kiddush Levana until the 7th of the month. The Nardoim, you can say Kiddush Levana up until the 16th of the month. Top of Membase, 42a. Says Rabbi Yochanan, and both of them hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Now I will say, now interestingly enough, so here's what's fascinating. Rabbi Yochanan says the rule. The rule is you can say Kiddush Levana until the deficiency of the moon is filled in. So there's machlokes in terms of what does that mean. Rabbi Yehuda says that means up until 7 days into the month, and the Nardoim say up until 16 days into the month. So the Gemara says both hold like Rabbi Yochanan. One says that the moon has to look like a bow. So we'll say that's the opinion ultimately again of Rav Yehuda, up until 7 days. And then our Doim say it has to look like a sieve. Now a sieve means it's fully circular, because by the time you get to the middle of the month, what does the moon look like? The moon is complete. The moon is complete. So we'll say, so fundamental machlokes over here, really incredible machlokes, an important machlokes. Up until when can one say Kiddush Levana? Rabbi Yehuda, 7th of the month, because at that point again, the deficiency of the month has been, of the moon has been filled, and that the moon no longer looks fully incomplete. Looks like a bow. Looks like a bow. The Nardoim, no, up until the deficiency is complete, that means the middle of the month, when the moon is completely full. So let's go weiter. So the Gemara says, Amrale Rav Achami Difti Ravina. V'levarech hatov ha'metiv. So maybe the bracha that you make over the moon should be at tov ha'metiv. So this is actually quite beautiful. Take a look at Rashi. For the 3 lines down in Rashi from the top. V'levarech hatov ha'metiv. Ad Rav Yehuda parech nehi nami demishiva ve'elech leka lemeimar mechadesh chadashim levarech miya hatov ha'metiv shekal shashu metiv lana b'milusa tamid shemosefes lahayir la'olam. So Rashi points out over that this is really going on Rabbi Yehuda. Right, that is interesting, right? So Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, you could recite Kiddush Levana up until the 7th of the month. So the Gemara says, okay, but from the 7th up until the 16th, you should be able to say Hatova HaMeitiv. Now what's in Hatova HaMeitiv is the bracha, essentially, Shechianu and Hatova HaMeitiv are like sister brachas. So Shechianu is a bracha when you say something positive that benefits you. Hatova HaMeitiv is something that benefits you and also has the ability to benefit others. So that why do we say Hatova HaMeitiv on the filling in of the moon each and every month? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, say Kiddush Levana up until the 7th of the month, and from the 7th up until the 16th, you should be able to say Hatova HaMeitiv. To which the Gemara says, Amalei, if that's the case, Atu ki chasra min mevarchinan dayan ha'emes. So maybe then you should say that from the 16th and on, when the moon begins to diminish, you should say Baruch dayan ha'emes. Right at the end, in other words, remember, Hatova HaMeitiv by definition means, right? To say Hatova HaMeitiv would mean that the completion of the moon is something objectively positive, which would then have to mean the converse would have to be true as well, which is that the diminution of the moon is something objectively adverse or negative, right? And therefore, again, if you're going to say Hatova HaMeitiv as the moon fills in, you're going to have to go ahead and say Dayan HaEmes as the moon diminishes. To which the Gemara says, okay, so fine. Maybe yes. Maybe we should say that. Let's go ahead and say Hatova HaMeitiv as the moon as is filling up, and Dayan HaEmes as the moon is diminishing. To which the Gemara says, no. Kivan dahainu archei lo mevarchinan. So I'll say this is fascinating. No, since this is the natural way of the moon, we don't recite the bracha. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Almost right across in Rashi. Dahainu archei bechol chodesh brias olam kimin hagohi ve'in kan din paranos b'chesrona v'lo haftacha lanu chesed b'miliusa. So the Gemara suggests over here that this is the natural way the world works. So because it's the natural way the world works, this is interesting. There's not per se a bracha in the completion of the moon, and there's not a klala, there's nothing negative in the diminution of the moon. It just is the way that it works. So I would say, to me, I don't know, I was, I have to tell you, last night, but I would say I would encourage you, take advantage of the space medrash at night. Shmuel Armin is starting a night Seder program here at the shul. Baruch Hashem, I was here last night. It was like 9:45. The base medrash was quiet. It was surreal. Mamish surreal. It's beautiful at night in the courtyard, also beautiful. So I was thinking about this because this Gemara seems to almost fly in the face a little bit of how we normally think. So you're telling me now essentially what the Gemara is saying is Olam kimin hago noeg. The world just kind of operates in a certain Kadosh Baruch Hu programs certain things. The moon gets bigger, the moon gets smaller. It's not bracha, it's not klala, it just is. So it was, I had a difficult time wrapping my head around this because to a certain degree, it feels like it's not the way we're programmed to think. The way we're programmed to think is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously directs everything, and everything in this world kind of fits into a bucket. It's either a good bucket or a bad bucket, or positive or negative, or bracha or klala, or hatov ha'meitiv or dayan ha'emes. And what the Gemara is introducing us to is that there are certain things in the world that it's just a program. It's just a program, like sunrise and sunset, right? In other words, it's not good, it's not bad. It is. There's certain functionality in the world that just by definition is. Just by definition is. Now again, is there beauty in it? Is there kedusha in it? Is there messages in it? Absolutely. But it's interesting. I think perhaps what the Gemara is trying to teach us over here is, maybe you don't have to necessarily read into everything. Maybe there are certain things in life that just are. And I think this is so incredibly profound, because remember, if this is true in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, alachas kama v'kama is true in our relationship with other people. They both say one of the most difficult things in human relationships is we tend to read into everything, right? Someone says something, well, why did you say that? Why didn't you say it like that? Why did you use this word? Why didn't you use that word? This may or may not happen often in marriage, right? But there's all of this intuiting different things, and meanwhile, sometimes just what I said is what I said. There's actually no deeper meaning to it, right? There's no like double entendre. There's no hidden, like I don't need like my Frosted Flakes decoder ring to figure out, like what it is that was said and how it was said. Sometimes it just is what it is, and it doesn't have to have a deeper meaning in every single way. So I think Kadosh Baruch Hu is modeling this for us. You know what? The moon fills up, the moon diminishes. It just is what it is. It's beautiful, it's fantastic, and there are messages in it, but again, you don't have to read into it Dayan ha'emes or Atov ha'meitiv. Incredible. Let's go weiter. They both say it's a beautiful Gemara. Whoever goes ahead and recites, this is Kiddush Levana. Whoever recites Kiddush Levana at the right time, it's as if he is receiving the Shechina. So I'll say this is such a beautiful Gemara. If you go ahead and you recite Kiddush Levana at the appropriate time. Now again, remember, what's the appropriate time? That's our machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda says up until 7 days, then our dime say 16. It's a little bit anticlimactic. We know how we paskin. We pass like the Nardime. That's why we do have the ability to say Kiddush Levana up until the middle. The 16th is the middle of the month. Right, middle of the month. We actually paskin really until the night of the 15th is normally how it works out. But again, that's how we paskin. So the Gemara is such beautiful. Whoever says Kiddush Levana, it's as if they are receiving the Shechina. The Gemara says, Ksiv hacha chodesh hazer, o ksiv hasam zekili va'anvehu. It says ultimately, again, this month, this chodesh hazer, and it says zekili, so it's the zeh. HaChodesh hazer lachem, which is Kiddush Levana, and zekili va'anvehu. I just want to point out, isn't it fascinating that probably one of the most neglected tfilos is Kiddush Levana. What is Kiddush Levana? Kiddush Levana is what stands between you and your car on Motzei Shabbos, right? It's the tefillah I need to like avoid eye contact with, like duck through, right? Get out of there. I would say, isn't that fascinating? Isn't that fascinating? So right, it is the tefillah where some segment of the population peels off, or just doesn't do it, or just even if it's done, it's like, come on, chick-chack, right? So it's fascinating, yet that's the tefillah that the Gemara says, if you say Kiddush Levana, it is as if you are receiving the Shechina. I'll say, one of the interesting things in Ruchnius, sometimes whether we recognize it or not, many of us live with a fear of spiritual intimacy. We live with a fear of closeness to Hashem, because I'm scared that if I get too close, the expectations are going to grow. If I get too close, I may have to make certain changes. So there's a certain fear of spiritual intimacy, which is why, whether we realize it or not, we keep HaKadosh Baruch Hu a little bit at a distance. Like I always wondered about this with Kiddush Levana. It can't be that so many people are so busy on Motzei Shabbos that they just gotta run out and this, that, and even if I say it like this, just like it's the fastest tefillah. I mean, Psuki the Zimmer is like a close second, right? But Lamaisa, like why? Like what is it? It's almost as if like there's like not an aversion, but what is it? And I'll say I think it comes from a deep place. That a lot of us we have intimacy issues, spiritual intimacy issues, that I'm scared to get a little too close because I'm scared of what that's going to require of me or mean for me to give to the relationship. So consciously, subconsciously, I just blow past it. I just blow past it, because if I don't have to makabel pnei hashchina, then at the end of the day I could kind of keep HaKadosh Baruch Hu at a distance. We could remain good friends. It's platonic. He's happy, or I think he's happy. I'm happy, and I don't have to really up the expectations on me. It's so incredible. By the way, what does it mean that Kiddush Levana is ki'ilu makabel pnei hashchina? So I will say, so there's a beautiful Maharsha. The Maharsha, just listen to this. He says, I just want to read it to you. I'll post it later on in the chat. The Maharsha says, Ayin bazev perish rabim b'sol parak tzilas hashachar. Listen to this. Let's say this is such a profound Gemara. Klal Yisrael and Galus. So Klal Yisrael and Galus often doesn't have the ability to really see the Shechina, right? What we lament most, and I will say, by the way, I just want to point out, I believe by this Motzei Shabbos it'll already be time to say, when's Rosh Chodesh? Wednesday, Thursday. So it'll be close. So I don't know when the Molad is. Okay, I don't know if it's, but whatever it is. The point is, next week or two, this is going to be a very shaykh Gemara. So we'll say, so remember, the Gemara says over here, the Maharsha says, in Galus, we are not zoche, we are not able to see the Shechina. We're not able, we'll say, the greatest tragedy of Galus is that when there was a Beis HaMikdash, there was an acute manifestation of the divine. We were able to see the Shechina, able to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu all the time. In Galus, we're not able to see the Shechina in the same overt way. Aval Chidush Halavana, listen to this, who similarly Yisrael, Shemasidim Lischadish Kimosa. But the renewal of the moon is a metaphor for the renewal of the Jewish people. And the same way that the moon waxes and wanes, right? The moon diminishes and then it regenerates. That is the ultimate metaphor for Klal Yisrael, that we too will regenerate. This is so beautiful. Kiddush Levana is the most inspiring tefillah. Why? Because it is the metaphor for Klal Yisrael. The moon is beautiful and then it wanes, right? And then it wanes, right? And then it goes out and diminishes and it becomes almost invisible. That's the story of our people. That's the story of us as individuals. And so when we go out to do Kiddush Levana and we're making a bracha on a crescent of a moon, right? On a crescent, and we recognize that this moon is going to regenerate, it instills within us the confidence, the hope, the optimism, the belief that we too will once again be zochet to be makabel pnei hashchina in a rebuilt Yerushalayim with a Beis HaMikdash. And therefore the Gemara says, when you do Kiddush Levana, it is as if you are being makabel pnei hashchina. Such an overwhelming and incredible and beautiful Gemara. All right, let's go back to Rabbi Shmuel. But listen to this. So Rabbi Shmuel says, if the only thing Klal Yisrael had the ability to do each and every month was Kiddush Levana, it would be enough. Wow. It would be enough. Now it makes sense. Why? Why? Because what does Kiddush Levana do? Kiddush Levana instills within me the confidence and the optimism of renewal. And that is the most important yesod as a people and as individuals, to believe that no matter how far I sink, no matter how much I diminish myself, or no matter how much I am diminished, I always have the ability to rebound and to remake myself. This is true as a nation and true as an individual. And who gives me that koach? The Ribono Shel Olam. Therefore, again, if you're only going to say one tefillah throughout the entire month, right? Only one tefillah, Kiddush Levana it is. Incredible, incredible. Amar Abaye, Hilchoch Nemrina Muhammad. Abaye says, therefore, we have to make sure to say Kiddush Levana standing. It's such an important tefillah. We have to say, I just want to tell you, just coming attractions. We're going to have the schus. Kiddush Levana is going to take place in our chutzner, in our courtyard. Just imagine, we can do message. Oh, good. So hopefully, again, assuming that the sun is out, that the clouds are not there, we can see the moon. If the sun is out, there's the other issues, right? But again, like to create an atmosphere, right? Sometimes you're saying Kiddush Levana, and what happens? Your ride is already there, right? They're getting impatient behind the wheel. They're ready to pick you up. So how much kavanah can you put into it? So we begin to see the power and profundity of this tefillah. Incredible. One tefillah a month. If you only have one tefillah a month, Kiddush Levana it is. Somebody tells the story. Therefore, Abaye says you have to say it standing up. Kiddush Levana has to be recited standing. Meremar Marzutra Mikasvi. Meremar Marzutra will say who were elderly and couldn't stand up on their own would support themselves on the shoulders of others in order to be able to recite Kiddush Levana. And you make a bracha of Kiddush Levana. What's the bracha? In Eretz Yisrael, they make the following bracha: Baruch Mechadesh Chadashim. That was their Kiddush Levana in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, you know what? Could wrap my head around Kavanah for that, and I think I could. I can get behind that. Right? Baruch Mechadesh Chadashim. That was the bracha Dashalom Kiddush Melech Olam Mechadesh Chadashim. Shkoyach, good to right? That was right. That's it. That's it. So listen to this. Amrale. So they said, "Hi nashi didan namin varchi." What it sounds like over here is, well, that's a woman's bracha. What does that? What does that mean? That's a woman's bracha. It's like a good like Talmudic shtach, right? That's what we'll say. So the Maharsha points out over here. He says Rosh Chodesh, and again, not a topic for now, but Rosh Chodesh is a women's yantiv. There's a special connection between women and Rosh Chodesh. So the problem over here is this only makes note of Mechadesh Chadashim of Rosh Chodesh. This bracha doesn't really make note of the moon itself. So what they're saying is the bracha is, okay, makes reference of Rosh Chodesh, which is beautiful for women, but it doesn't really make reference to the dynamic of the moon, which is what we're trying to highlight over here. Ella, Kedrav Yehuda Marav. We'll say it's such a beautiful. Damrav Yehuda. We'll say, we're going to now go through the bracha of Kiddush Levana. Es chatani maskir. I'll tell you, we say Kiddush Levana for many years. I've never said the bracha in a way like the Gemara highlights it. And you'll see also, you just take the time, because like I said, usually for whatever the reason, on Motzei Shabbos we're in a rush. What we're in a rush for or rush to is not immediately clear, but we're always in a rush. So look what the Gemara says. So here's the bracha. Baruch. Now obviously it's Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Asher b'ma'amaro bara shechakim. Through His word, through your words, you created the heavens. Uberuach piv kol tzivaam. And ultimately, again, through the breath of His mouth, all of the hosts. Chok uzman nasan lahem. So literally, again, chok means like a rule. Uzman, and set times you have given to each of the celestial hosts. Shelo yishanu es tafkidam. Everyone has a job. And ultimately, again, no one switches their job. Everyone has a mission, and no one forsakes their mission for something else. Sasim usmechem lasos v'son konam, and they are so happy to perform the work of their Creator. Paul the MS. So I just want to point out over here again, what's so beautiful is the Maharsha comments on this. He says, "Shelo yishanu es tafkidam, perush shelo yishanu minui shelahem." You know what's incredible when you look up at the heavens? The stars never say, "You know what? Today I'm going to be the moon." Right? All right, and the moon never says, "You know what? Today is my turn to be the sun." Everyone has a mission. And everyone in the celestial sphere stays focused on their mission. And there's a godless stat about saying. We spend so much time in life trying to be other people or trying to be other things, when instead of trying to maximize who and what we are. If the celestial hosts have their mission and their godless is, they stay on task. They stay on mission. So my avoda in life is to figure out, I want your mission. I want to be like you. I want to be like this. I want to be like this. Of course, it's always good to emulate positive qualities in other people, but sometimes we spend so much time trying to be like others that we forget to maximize our own personalistic mission. And when I look up at the heavens and I see everyone being the best version of themselves, I recognize that is my avoda as well. Stay on point, stay on mission, stay on task, fulfill your shlichus. He goes on, he says, Paul the MS, again, they affect works of truth, and their work is truth. Baruch Hu says to the moon to renew, and literally, again, it is a crown of glory to those who come from the womb. For they are destined to renew like the moon itself. Like the moon itself. Just as the moon renews, so too human beings are destined to renew as well. And to go ahead and literally again praise their Creator Hashem kivod malchuso, through the name of your everlasting kingdom. Baruch atah Hashem mechadesh chadoshim. Right, Baruch atah Hashem. Right, blessed are you Hashem, the one who renews the new months. So interestingly enough, again, we use the same mechadesh chadoshim. We use that same bracha, but we just add on a little bit beautiful text to it. Such a beautiful Gemara. Because again, with great strategy, you could affect war. With whom can you find war of Torah? In other words, who could wage the war of Torah? Who is capable of waging the war of Torah? It's beautiful. Whoever learns a lot of Mishnah, because if you learn Mishnayos, right, you're armed with a lot of knowledge. Mishnayos convey to you knowledge. Now again, it doesn't give you Gemara, which gives you a lot of halachas and give you a lot of insight, but it arms you with a lot of knowledge. Kari Rav Yosef Anafshe, the Rav Tvuos Bekoach Shar. So both say, so a beautiful idea over here. Again, the juxtaposition of this is just the same opinions, right? Same authors. But Lamais again, the Mishnah, the Gemara then goes in and switches gear. That the only way to go ahead and wage the war of Torah is how? Is if you're armed with ammunition. And what's the ammunition to engage in the war of Torah? Mishnayos, at least again, because that arms you with the general knowledge you need in order to go ahead and be successful in the Macham of Torah. Fine. I'm Rabbi Siyim Barashi. Lo Shana El Shos. Now remember, let's say, we saw in the Mishnah also that we do allow for some level of time discrepancy between the witnesses as well, right? So if they go ahead, one says, right, we saw Reuven kill Shimon 2 hours into the day. Other witness says, I saw Reuven kill Shimon 3 hours into the day. Ultimately, that works, right? That works as well. The Gemara says, but if one opinion says, I saw Reuven, right? One witness says, I saw Reuven kill Shimon, before sunrise, and the other one says, after sunrise, their edus is batal. Why? Because that doesn't make sense. Right, that doesn't make sense. They can't. There's no discrepancy like that before sunrise, after sunrise. Before sunrise, it's not light. After sunrise, it is light. So how do you? The only way to explain that discrepancy is that probably someone's lying, or just someone that just doesn't have their facts right. So the Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious. Ella echad omer kodem neitzachama ve'echad omer besochaneitz. No, rather, what's happening over here? One witness says we saw Reuven kill Shimon before sunrise, and the other one says it was during sunrise. So hanai pshita. It's also obvious that the testimony doesn't line up. So what would you have thought? Ha bigiluye kai v'zaharure ba'amohu dechazu. So I'll say, so maybe what ended up happening over here is they're really saying the same thing. And the one who says ultimately, again, that it was during sunrise wasn't really during, but rather, again, it was during the glow of the sun, and he saw the rays. So maybe they're really saying the same thing. Maybe it's reconcilable. Kamash Malan, no. Kamash Malan will say that when you have discrepancies like that, before sunrise, after sunrise, during sunrise, before sunrise, where there are objectively observable, events, and the witnesses are not on the same page about it, that essentially disallows the testimony. Incredible. So remember again, so the Mishnah went on to say that halacha l'maisa, if one of the students in the Beis Din, one of the students in the Sanhedrin, finds a reason to go and exonerate the defendant, we invite him onto the Beis Din, and he remains there for the rest of that day. Says the Gemara, Osa Yom Sulo, he just stays there for the rest of the day, and that's it, not anymore. So the Gemara says, V'atanya, we learn, Im yesh mamish b'dvarav, if the student was saying good, right, the student had something positive to go ahead and say, right, and the student, did I know it was not supposed to do that? I'm sorry. Good. I was just focusing it on here. I'm sorry. So the Gemara says, we just invite him ultimately again for that day and no more. He doesn't get to stay on the Beis Din. We learn if the student says good, we invite him to be part of the Sanhedrin and we don't go ahead and ever take him down. And if what he was saying ultimately again is not really all that helpful, then we let him stay for the rest of the day, but not after that. Why? No, what it means is like this. If the student says, I have something to contribute to exonerate the defendant, so we invite him to join the Beis Din. If he has something good to say, we'll keep him on the Beis Din going forward. If he doesn't have something good to say, we'll keep him on the Beis Din that day, but afterwards we'll go ahead and take him off. Okay, so the Gemara says as follows: Matzah lo zechus. So the Gemara says. So remember again, if the Gemara then talks about, the Mishnah then talks about over here, if they can't agree on an exoneration verdict. So what do? So they go ahead and they go back and forth. They deliberate right overnight or over the course of the night into the next day. And the Gemara says that they also go ahead and they don't drink wine and they diminish. The Mishnah said that, and they diminish their food consumption. So the Gemara says, Yain my time, but why don't they drink wine? Amar Kra, Uluroznim e shechar. Literally translated, rulers e shechar. The Gemara says, what does this mean? Ha'oskim barazal shel olam al yishtakru. Those who go ahead and deal with the secrets of the world, which is what's called judgment, those who deal with the secrets of judgment should not go ahead and become intoxicated, which makes sense. In other words, if you're going ahead and you're dealing with dinei nefashis, you're dealing with capital cases, one should not go ahead and become inebriated. Lo ra'u mai, so the Gemara goes weiter. Now, the Mishnah essentially said that if halacha l'maisa, they can't reach a verdict, right? They can't reach a verdict. So then halacha l'maisa, again, the Gemara says they have to keep, and let's say it's deadlocked, right? The Beis Din is deadlocked. They have to keep going back and forth until they're able to emerge with a majority one way or another. Either a majority of one to exonerate or a majority of two to implicate, right? But they have to keep working. So the Gemara says, lo ra'u mai. What happens if Beis Din can't do it? They remain deadlocked. Well, what do you do in a case like this? Amar Rav Acha pocher also. Rav Acha says, okay, look, essentially a deadlocked Beis Din results in a not guilty plea, a not guilty verdict. That's what it does. So Gemara says, V'china Rav Yochanan pocher also. Rav Yochanan says, yeah. So a deadlocked Beis Din will result in a not guilty verdict. Amar Rav Papa Abaye v'liftrei meikar. Well, if that's the case, then why don't you do this? Why don't you do this when the Beis Din is deadlocked earlier on? In other words, when they were smaller, why not go ahead instead of, remember, because the process is we keep adding on and adding on and adding on until we get to 72. So instead of doing that, why not, as soon as they're deadlocked earlier on, give them a not guilty plea? No, because the idea is we don't like a deadlocked Beis Din. It doesn't look right. In other words, Beis Din should be able to be decisive, Beis Din should be able to be conclusive, and Beis Din should be able to give a definitive ruling. It doesn't look right if they can't, and therefore we feel compelled to try to work this through until they can. Good. So and I got an alternate version of this. Rav Papa says to Abaye, why do you have to keep adding on dayanim? Essentially, once you see that they're deadlocked, just exonerate him right then and there. Rabbi Yossi, you write this right, so that supports you. This time Rabbi Yossi, Amar Kishem Shem Mosifin Al Beizin Shal Shim Be'echad, Kach Mosifin Al Beizin Shal Esrim Mushtosha. The same way that you can't add on to a Beis Din of 71, you also don't have to add on to a Beis Din of 23. That if the Beis Din is deadlocked, then you know what? Exoneration. That's the way it works. Tanabanon. Omer b'dinei mamanes nizdakin adin. Vein omer b'dinei nefashas nizdakin adin. So what's the interesting brayso? When it comes to financial adinei mamanes, we say nizdakin hadin. Now what that literally means is what? The judgment became old, but when it comes to capital cases, we don't say nizdakin hadin. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? My nizdakin hadin, what exactly does that mean? Ilema kash dina. So we'll say if it means like this, kash dina, if it means that halacha l'maisa the Beis Din is saying this case is too difficult for us, and we can't issue a verdict now. We have to give it more time. That's what it means. Then ipchami ba'ilei. Then Abba say you should say that dafka by capital cases and not by monetary cases. So the Gemara says, Amrafuna bar Manuach b'shed Rav Acha, Braid Rav Ika, Ipoch. You're right, switch it around. Rav Hashem or the other Mosevach. No, don't switch it around. What does it mean? Mine is dakin adin. What is nizdakin adin? Chacham dina. It means a declaration that we decided appropriately, right? We decided appropriately. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, when it comes to dinei mamanis, Beis Din says we have decided appropriately. Dinei nefashas, they don't make that declarative statement. So Gemara says, Meisa reis a kasha. So the head of the judges, he makes the declaration is dakin hadin. So Gemara says, 1 second. If you want to say that ultimately again is dakin hadin means a declaration. We did good. We judged appropriately. Then Hayud da Amar Gadol makes sense. The head of the Beis Din says this, But if you say that halacha l'maaseh, it means that the din is too difficult and we can't find a resolution, lo sagid lo amar gadol kisufihu de kamichsaf nafshei. Why does the gadol have to say it? Enough that it has to be declared by the Beis Din, but does the gadol, does the head of the Beis Din have to say it? Isn't that embarrassing? To which the Gemara says, yeah, there's going to be some level of embarrassment if the Beis Din can't reach resolution, but it is better to have the embarrassment come from the Dayan himself than to have it come from others. Incredible. So others say, if you want to say that it's a declaration that Beis Din says, it's too difficult, we can't reach a verdict. If you want to say that it's really a declaration that the Beis Din is making, the Beis Din is saying, we did a good job adjudicating this case. Is a person supposed to praise themselves? Beautiful pasuk. The pasuk says, you know what, if you're deserving of praise, let other people praise you and don't praise yourself. So how could the head of the Beis Din be saying, Shkoyach, we did a good job in adjudicating this case? Shiny milsa de beidina da agodol ramya. No, because whenever it comes to a Beis Din, everything that comes from a Beis Din always comes from the head of the Beis Din. Any declarations always come from the head of the Beis Din. Kidisnan, Gamru as hadavar, hayu machnisin also galosh v'yalon omer aish ploni atazakai, aish ploni atachayim. In the same way that the gadol of the Beis Din would announce the verdict, any other announcements of the Beis Din would come from the head of the Beis Din as well, including if the Beis Din did a good job, they would say again, Chacham Dina Shkoyach, we adjudicated this case appropriately, and such an announcement ultimately again would come from the head of the Beis Din. So for both sides, Hadrun alach, are you both kin mazel tov, mazel tov? Okay, short-lived celebration. Let's go back to Nigmar Adin. Nigmar Adin. So now, what's really fascinating about this is we just keep going through the judicial process. So Nigmar Hadin. If at the end of the day, again, they finished, they reached the verdict. So and now we'll say we're talking about a case of a guilty verdict. So we bring him out for skila. For skila. So you bring him out for skila. So Rabbi say, obviously, we happen to be talking about a case over here where the punishment was skila. So remember for skila. So based on skila, hayachutz lebeis din. Now, interesting, I will say the place where they would stone him, and again, we'll talk more about this in greater depth in a little bit, but the place ultimately, again, where they would do skila was outside of Beis Din. Shneimar, Hotzia Samakalo. Right, the pasuk says again. So in other words, the execution spot wasn't by Beis Din; it was somewhere removed from Beis Din, because the pasuk says Hotzia Samakalo. Echad Omer Al Pesach Beis Din is incredible. So I'll say. So now, right. So let's say witnesses came. Reuven killed Shimon. Reuven's been sentenced to death. Okay. So now they're taking Reuven out to be executed through skila. They positioned the guy, one guy who stood by the entranceway of the Beis Din. Vasudar biyado, and ultimately again he had a sudar, like a cloth. A what? Yeah, but something bigger, right? A sheet, yeah, good, a sudar, right? Sudar was in his hand. V'sus rachok mimenu kidesh, and now watch this. Listen to how this was set up. So there was a guy stationed out of Beis Din. He had essentially like a flag. He had like a flag, right? Now there was a guy in the distance on a horse-mounted rider, right? And this guy was far enough away, but in ocular connection. So he was able to see the flag guy by the Beis Din. Now, why did they do this? Echad Omer Echad Yesh Li Lam Dolav Schus. So both say, now watch this. So they're leaving Reuven out to be executed, but let's say as they're leaving him out, someone comes into Beis Din and they say, oh, I have testimony that could exonerate Reuven. They remember again, Beis Din was accepting testimony to exonerate Reuven literally up until the moment he was going to be executed. So therefore, again, they needed a mechanism that if there was last-minute testimony, that they would be able to get word so that Reuven wouldn't be executed. So if somebody came into Beis Din and said that last-minute testimony, what would happen? Flag guy would wave his flag. Horse-mounted rider would quickly go to the Beis HaSkila and say, wait. and say, wait. So the Gemara says, Hala meineth besudarim, vasus rats umamidan. So flag guy would wave his flag, horse-mounted rider would race off to the Beis HaSkila. I would tell everyone to pause. Even if Reuven said, let's listen to this. Reuven is about to be executed. Reuven says, you know what? I just thought of something. Okay? I just thought of something. It's amazing how you think about things, right? When you're about to get that skill. I just thought of something that could exonerate me. The Gemara says, Machzirin also. We listen to him. We'll bring him back to Beis Din. Afilu arba v'chamesh pa'amim, even 4 or 5 times. Or bilvad sheyesh mamish bedvarav. As long as what? Obviously, I will say there's going to be some level of investigation over here, right? We're not just going to bring him back to the Beis Din. Reuven, what do you got? Right? Tell us. What? Right? What information do you have that is new and necessary that is going to be helpful over here? So the Gemara says, "Ubeis haskila chutz lebeis din hava." So now the Gemara says, by the way, was the Beis haskila outside of Beis Din? So it makes it sound like over here, obviously, that the place where they executed Reuven was a good distance away, right? Because at the end of the day, it says they took him out. So it sounds like he was a good distance away. So the Gemara says that's true. V'sula v'hatanya. Now we'll say now. It makes it sound like all you had to do over here was put the Beis HaSkila somewhere out of Beis Din. It didn't have to be far. It just has to be somewhere away. So the Gemara says, really, is that true? V'hatanya Beis HaSkila hayachutz l'shalosh machanos. Usually I will say the Beis HaSkila was outside of the 3 camps. Now remember again, the lashon of 3 camps is usually reminiscent of the desert. But the truth is we also have the same 3 camp model by Yerushalayim, right? Rashi actually points out this over here. Rashi says, "Chutz l'shalosh machanos b'Yerushalayim hu d'shayach l'meimar deika azara machane shchina v'arabayis machane levia v'chalair machane Yisrael." This 3 camp model existed by the Beis Hamikdash as well. The azara, the Beis Hamikdash itself, that's called machane shchina, right? The harabayis, that's called machane levia, Levitic camp, and Yerushalayim itself is called machane Yisrael. If they had to stone someone, where was he stoned? Outside of Yerushalayim. So the Beis HaSkila is outside. So you see from here, it's not enough for the execution spot just to be a little bit removed from the Beis Din, but it really has to be outside. It has to be outside. So Gemara says, you're right, in Kitigamret. Yeah, absolutely. When we say that the Beis HaSkila was outside of the Beis Din, it doesn't mean a little bit outside of the Beis Din. It really means it was really removed, what we'll call 3 camps worth outside of the Beis Din. So why does the Mishnah list it this way? So Gemara listen to this. Nafkamina Nafik Beidin of Yosef Chutz l'Shalosh Machanos Avdinan Beis HaSkila Chutz l'Beis Din. So Gemara listen to this. So Gemara says, come teach us the following halacha, that even if Beis Din, let's say you have a Beis Din that is convened outside of the city. So you already have a Beis Din that's kind of like outside of the 3 machanos. I might have thought that since Beis Din is already situated outside of the 3 camps, therefore what? Therefore you can have the Beis HaSkila anywhere, because the Beis Din itself is already outside of the 3 camps. Kamash Malon, that if Beis Din is outside of the 3 camps, the Beis HaSkila itself still has to be distanced from the Beis Din even more. Why is that? It shouldn't look like it's a Beis Din of murderers, meaning what? It shouldn't look like Beis Din is eager to execute. So we don't want Beis Din to look eager to execute. So because we don't want it to look like Beis Din is eager to execute, we always distance the execution spot from the Beis Din in a significant way. Other possibility, the Gemara says, "Inami ki hechi detehavi le hatsala." So we'll say furthermore again, distancing the execution spot from the Beis Din is also beneficial. Why is it beneficial? Because I will say the longer it takes for the accused to get from Beis Din to the execution spot, the longer we have to find some last-minute, late-breaking, evidence that will exonerate him. Right? If the Beis HaSkila is right next to the Beis Din, so then again you pass the verdict to execute the guy. There's no time. By making again the Beis HaSkila a little bit further out, ultimately allows just for a little window, a little bit of an additional window of exoneration. So I say, for where do we know that the Beis HaSkila is? Well, so I just want to point out again, just so you understand that this 3 camp model is based on the way we camped in the desert, right? In the middle of the camp of Klal Yisrael in the desert, you had the Mishkan. That's called Machane Shchina. Who lived around the Mishkan? the Levium. That's called Machane Levia, the Levitic camp, and around that you had Yisrael, the Machane Yisrael. So essentially that becomes like the domicile model for Klal Yisrael, and that was replicating Yerushalayim. So in Yerushalayim you have the Beis HaMikdash, that's Machane Shechina, Har HaBayis, the Temple Mount, that's called Machane Levia, and then the rest of the city, that's called Machane Yisrael. So for example, so Beis Din operated again in the Beis HaMikdash, but the Beis HaSkila was outside of Yerushalayim. So you see, from the Beis HaSkila has to be outside of the three camps. Either number one, because we don't want it to look like Beis Din is eager to execute, or possibly number two, by distancing the execution spot from the Beis Din itself, we give the accused a little bit more time to be examined. From where do you know this? That ultimately, again, Beis HaSkila has to be outside of the Beis HaMikdash itself. You know what I'll say? We'll stop over for today. We're making great time. Don't worry about it. We're good. Let's say tremendous. Again, truth is that Amud Aleph was like Kiddush Levana. You can't rush through Kiddush Levana, right? You can't rush through an Amud of Gemara like that. Osai Shkoyach. What you got? All right, have a great day, everyone.